Hi, I'm Melanie Barkley with Penn State Extension, and I'd like to share how one flock has improved profitability by using rams with estimated breeding values. This project was made possible through Northeast Sustainable Ag Research and Extension grant funds used for research and education. Northeast SARE serves states in the northeastern area from West Virginia to Maine. In regard to producer progress, we're going to take a look at the flock background and then look at how using rams with EBVs has impacted profitability for this operation. In particular, we'll look at how improvements to prolificacy, lamb death loss, weaning weights, loin eye size, feed costs, and deworming affected profitability. This flock has always raised purebred Dorsets. However, the flock originally focused on traits for frame type Dorsets before moving in the direction of performance. The operation switched to performance type rams in 2007. And although the operation normally uses rams with EBVs, they have also used an occasional weather type ram to maintain eye appeal. If we analyze the flock further, we find that strengths would be the 85 acres of pasture in a rotational grazing system, good facilities in terms of the fencing and watering systems, barns and feeding systems, and the location of the farm, which has good access to ethnic markets. In particular, milk-fed lambs are marketed through New Holland sale barn. For weaknesses, the flock had too many hard-doing sheep that required grain in order to maintain body condition. Many of the lambs were born as singles to mothers that either were lacked adequate mothering ability or were poor milk producers. The lambs also did not have enough muscle. They had daughters that would exhibit carcass lambs at the county fair, and the lambs got disqualified several times because the lambs didn't meet the minimum loin eye size of 2.0 square inches. And overall, the producer was losing money. So when the farm made the decision to move to performance type sheep, the producers set some goals for the farm that would move the sheep flock toward profitability. They wanted to increase muscling in the lambs, which would increase their value for the ethnic market. They also wanted the ewes to better utilize pasture resources so that grain consumption occurred only during late gestation and throughout lactation. And then replacement ewe lambs would also be expected to better utilize pasture. In addition, producers wanted to increase the lambing percentage and increase the weaning weights. Because they sold lambs for the ethnic market, they wanted the lambs to be fat little butterballs that would meet the buyer needs. In other words, these lambs had to have some fat covering and still be heavily muscled. And in general, the flock needed to be easier keeping, and the ewes needed to be more self-sufficient, especially at lambing time. When making the switch to performance type sheep, the first selection criteria became performance appraisal. The rams were selected based on EBVs for several traits. And then lamb weights at birth and weaning would become important when selecting lambs to send to the market. In addition, post-weaning weight would be important for lambs kept for breeding stock. And keep in mind that ideally all lambs would be weighed through post-weaning, but because the producers sold these lambs to the ethnic market, this wasn't possible. Therefore, the farm also looked at 60-day adjusted weaning weights so that the owners could make preliminary decisions regarding what lambs to keep for breeding stock. Once the lambs met minimum standards for performance appraisal, they were then evaluated visually. They needed to have good structure, show good muscling characteristics, have adequate body capacity, and some eye appeal. This photo shows the youngest daughter exhibiting a lamb with performance type genetics at the Pennsylvania Farm Show, which is Pennsylvania's state fair. While the changes in certain characteristics were clear from the records, an additional feature would be to look at the economic value of those changes. So we can start by looking at lambing prolificacy, and this is defined as the number of lambs produced per ewe lambing, and it saw some ups and downs over time. In 2008, the flock's lambing prolificacy was at 160%. and then it dropped back a little in 2009 and then began to improve through 2014. Now, you remember I mentioned at the start of the presentation that the producer would occasionally use weather-tight bucks to maintain eye appeal. So this could explain some of the drop in lambing prolificacy, but overall we still see an improvement. This operation generally has 100 ewes lambing each year. And by using the data collected on prolificacy, we're going to assume an additional 40 lambs or 25% increase in prolificacy to make some calculations. If we consider that on this farm, on average, they had about an additional 40 lambs to sell. And if we value those lambs at $150, this calculates to $6,000 in additional income. This value of $150 per lamb is actually less than what this farm normally receives for their lambs, but I chose this value for the presentation so that it's more realistic for producers in other areas of the Northeast. With the death loss that changed over the years, we go from about a 10 to 13% death loss to a death loss that now ranges between 2 and 5%, with the exception of 2019. So in order to calculate the advantage of decreased death loss, we have to first consider the prolificacy improvement. In this case, if we use the original starting point of 160% prolificacy with a 10% death loss, the operation lost 16 lambs. So with improvements to 200% prolificacy with a 5% death loss, the operation lost 10 lambs. So this gives the operation about 6 more lambs to sell each year. So with 6 more lambs to sell, valued at $150 per lamb, the operation has an income increase of $900 based on the improvement to lamb death loss. They have more lambs to sell. 60-day adjusted weights also saw some changes. When the ewes produced lambs sired by performance rams, the weaning weight increased. And when the producer used non-performance type rams, the weaning weights began to drop. Now, this could be attributed both to the growth potential from the sire as well as the milking ability of the ewes. So if we look back at the data and compare the 2008 average adjusted 60-day weaning weight to the 2020 average adjusted 60-day weaning weight, we have a 5.5 pound increase. With the average lamb weighing 5.5 pounds heavier, and we had 186 lambs born in 2020. If we value them at $2 a pound, that means the operation saw an increased value of the lambs of $2,046. And again, the farm normally receives a higher price for the lambs, but the price has been reduced to accommodate producers who don't have access to the very high prices at that New Holland market. And while not all of these lambs would be sold, we can still consider that the value of all the lambs increased, whether they were sold or kept for breeding stock. In order to assess improvements in muscling, the farm chose to scan lambs to measure back fat and loin muscle depth. This photo shows an ultrasound scan of what these carcass measurements look like. We see that the back fat, which is depicted by the BF, the loin muscle depth, which is depicted as LMD, and the loin muscle area, which is depicted as loin LMA. The operation used scanners certified by NSIP to take these measurements. So the first time the operation scanned the lambs was in 2009. And this resulted in a range of loin eye areas from 1.8 to 3.4 square inches. The average loin eye area for all the lambs was at 2.4. And if we look at the performance sired lambs, they averaged 2.69, while the average loin eye area for the show sired lambs was 2.19. We can see some progress in moving to 2012 with the range going from 2.1 to 3.7 square inches with an average of 3.1. So as we might expect, we saw a higher percentage of performance genetics producing a higher average loin eye size. The last time the lambs were scanned was in 2017. The average loin eye area had dropped back a bit to 2.8 square inches. So from the start to the latest scan, the lambs have improved by 0.4 square inches in loin eye size. To calculate the increased carcass value, we'll use the 186 lambs produced in 2020, multiply that by the 0.4 square inch increase in loin eye size, and by a $10 benefit to carcass value for each square inch increase in loin eye size. So this calculates to an increase in carcass value of $744. In general, the farm retains about 25 ewe lambs each year as replacements in the flock. And in 2007, those 25 ewe lambs consumed a pound of grain per head per day for 300 days after weaning. And from 2014 through now, those ewe lambs receive no grain after weaning unless pasture becomes poor in quality. If that happens, grain may be added to increase weight gains so that the lambs reach 65 to 70% of their mature weight by the time the producer wants to breed them. So if we look at calculating decreased feed costs, we have 25 ewe lambs consuming a pound per head per day for 300 days. And if the operation's custom-made grain mix costs about $350 per ton, this calculates to a savings in feed costs of $1,312.50. The farm saw some good improvements in the need to deworm the sheep. In 2007, the sheep were dewormed on a 6 to 8 week schedule, or about 7 times per year. Then in 2014, the sheep were rotated every 4 to 5 days, with pasture forages never getting below 4 inches in height. And this meant that nobody needed dewormed throughout the year. Ewe lambs born that year actually received their first deworming treatment at about 14 months of age when they were nursing lambs. Currently, the sheep are dewormed as needed, but about once per year. To calculate the decreased deworming costs, we need to consider 125 sheep, which would be 100 ewes plus 25 replacement ewe lambs. They are now dewormed about 6 times less per year. And if we consider an approximate value for each treatment of $1.25 per head, then this comes to a savings of $937.50. So what is all this worth? We calculated $6,000 for increased lambing prolificacy, $900 for decreased death loss, $2,046 for increased weaning weights, $744 for increased carcass value, $1,312.50 saved in deworming costs, saved in feed costs, and $937.50 saved in deworming costs. When we add up all the increases in value and the cost savings, we calculate a total value to making a switch to performance type rams of $11,940. While these calculations aren't perfect, it does show us that there's a considerable value to using rams with EBVs. So the farm in the example actually saw a much higher change to profitability, but overall the farm has moved from losing money to showing a profit each year. Overall, improved profitability for our example farm started with evaluating the ewe flock to determine the strengths and weaknesses. Farm then set goals they wanted to achieve to improve performance, ultimately profitability. And keep in mind that the goals need to be realistic and they'll take time to achieve. But overall, when making selection and culling decisions, first evaluate lambs based on performance and then follow up with evaluation based on visual appraisal.